Welcome to Our Hen House. This is Marianne Sullivan.
And this is Jasmine Singer.
Really get ready for this week's show because it's a really good one. Jasmine has a wonderful interview with Monica Chen, who is the executive director of the Factory Farming Awareness Coalition, which is an organization we've covered before. We've talked about it a bit before, but we really go in depth this time. And it's doing really outstanding work.
And Monica is really an incredible ambassador for the animals. I absolutely loved this conversation, as well as the flock bonus segment. And if you're in the flock, definitely keep an eye out for that, because I will be continuing my conversation with Monica. So if you are in the flock, you'll get a link to the bonus segment in your email on Tuesday after this podcast episode goes up, or you can always find it on the flock Facebook group. And if you're not a member of the flock and you can afford it, you can join for $10 a month at ourhenhouse.org/donate.
I always have kind of mixed feelings when it's a really wonderful flock bonus segment, because I'm so happy that the flock is getting this extra great piece of interviewing. But at the same time, I feel bad it's not going out to everybody. Well, such is life. I don't know. It's a really, really good time to donate if you can, because as you probably know, we are doing a matching campaign and we will get double matched if we manage to raise $20,000 by the end of the year. If we don't manage to raise $20,000, I think we get zip.
Actually, you left out a layer. We are actually getting triple matched because we have an anonymous donor who is matching it as well.
I thought of it as double match because it's like two matches, but I guess you call that triple matched.
Yeah, it's triple. And so every dollar that you donate becomes tripled between now and the end of the year.
$3, yes.
We're not quite there yet, and I'm not saying that lightly. We're not going to get any of it. Our hen house won't continue if we can't make it there. I don't have a secret scheme. These are not just talking points. We have not reached that yet. And so none of that money will go to our efforts to create independent media that changes the world for animals unless we get that initial 20,000. So if you can, please join us by going to ourhenhouse.org/donate. And don't forget, we have some other really cool perks as well. We have our Flock First Friday Zoom calls, which are once a month on the first Friday of the month. And we also have the opportunity to meet together for one-on-ones with me to talk about your activism and your veganism. And I've really been enjoying those. I've been doing a couple of them a week. So if you haven't yet set that up with me, then email Jen at ourhenhouse.org if you're in the flock. And if you're not, join the flock and then set that up, because I would love that. We also have the Flock Facebook group, which is also a warm, wonderful place. So thank you so much for those of you who are in the flock and for those of you who are able to join us.
Yeah, it's really, really a tense time for us. And speaking of tense times, I have the worst transitions in the world. I want to really talk about your trip to New York City, because you were actually out and about this week, which just boggles my mind. I haven't been out and about since, 1943. And
you weren't born yet.
Before we get to that, I, on the other hand, have been on Twitter and looking at depressing things in the news. So I just wanted to talk about one thing before we talk about your trip. And that is, you've probably all heard about the strike at Kellogg's, where the workers, who seem to have like the foulest working conditions you can just about imagine, have been on strike. And Kellogg's this week decided in its great beneficence to fire them, and is going to try to get by and not get boycotted. So I am going to try to see that they don't succeed in that. But that's not what I wanted to talk about at all. You know, you have to kind of look up what to boycott if you're going to boycott Kellogg's, because they make a whole lot of things. It's not just cornflakes. And one of the things they make is Morningstar. Like, Morningstar is a Kellogg's company. I had no idea. I mean, not that I've had anything against Kellogg's up to now, so it didn't really matter that much. But one of the products that was listed in the things to boycott was their, I've never seen this in the store, but their meat substitute, which I am entertained to report has I think the worst name in all of the ridiculous names they give for meat substitutes. And that's Incognito. And if you think, well, what's wrong with that? It's Incognito. Incogmeato. That's the name of this product. I swear these people don't want these products to succeed. And that's why they give them these like hideous names. Would you ever buy that?
No, I wouldn't. It's a really bad name. You made me realize that years ago we did a segment on our hen house of the worst named foods, and I think we had wheat gluten on there, and we had nutritional yeast. I think one, but I think it's possible that incognito gives nutritional yeast a run for its money.
Yeah, I think you're right. Maybe I've just gotten used to the name nutritional yeast. It is really a pretty bad name. But incognito, yeah, it's way up there. Well, and that, and of course, that's just one of the Morningstar. I guess it's a Morningstar product, but they also make Morningstar. So there you go. The news from the labor front.
Do you think it's possible that part of the reason why so many of the mainstream vegan burgers on the market, the reason that they're hyperbolic is because they're trying to like compensate for how completely terrible so many of these names are? Like Beyond and Impossible. And there was another one in England that was also a hyperbolic name. I'm forgetting the name of it right now, but it was just as like big and over the top. And I just feel like...
But I like the big and over the top names. I like Impossible. I like Beyond. I'm not so crazy about Incognito.
No, that's my point. It's like they were moving the pendulum all the way to the other side.
I actually think I'm right. I think they want it to fail.
You might be. Okay, well, I have a really good transition to my New York City trip, which is that one of the things that I did, aside from a whole lot of networking and the Plant-Based World Expo that I'll tell you about in a second, is I saw Patti LuPone in Company on Broadway.
Wow.
And I was just reading an article about this and about her in the last week's New York Times. And she mentioned that Kevin Kline, who she had dated for 7 years, who she went to Juilliard with, when she was starring in Evita, she mentioned that the card she received from Kevin Kline said, inevitable. And the word Evita in inevitable was like popped out.
That is so good. Like, can you imagine the pleasure he must have felt when he thought of that? Oh, my God.
Yeah, but it's so much better than incognito. So now you see what my transition was. It was a long one, but I think it was worth it.
Actually, Inevitable is a really good name for plant-based meat.
Oh, you're right. Totally right. Oh, anyway, so I just kind of buried the lead. But I did see Patti LuPone in Company. And of course, that was the music was written by Stephen Sondheim, the late and great, my former pen pal. And the incredible Broadway composer and lyricist. And so it was wonderful. Like, it's super weird to go out in the world. And I've been taking COVID tests every day now. Obviously, I have my booster and I was double masked. It was still a vulnerable feeling, but I'm not sure I'll do it again soon. But I'm glad I did. I mean, assuming I didn't get COVID, I'm glad I did. And, that was not the reason for the trip. That was just a little cherry on top. The reason for the trip originally was because I'm in this list called The List. I know, very creative. And it's for women who work in media and tech. And there was this big holiday networking party, and it was going to be in our old neighborhood in Soho. And I just saw myself RSVPing yes. They were requiring not only proof of vaccination, but also a negative COVID test within the last 24 hours. So I went to that. And then I realized that the Plant-Based World Expo was going to be there while I was in the city. So incredible timing, just so cool to be there. And our friend Amy Trakinski, who's been on our hen house before, also was able to get me in the night before to this like cocktail party that Plant-Based Foods Association was running, talking about their incredible efforts to change the world for animals. And I want to have their executive director, Rachel Dreskin, on in the very near future. I had my mic with me and I was like ready to just whip it out and talk to her right then and there, but she was clearly in high demand that day. Anyway, this was at Javits Center. And just for reference, I think the last time I was at Javits Center was 25 years ago for a car show with like a guy I was dating at the time. Yes, you heard that right.
That's a bizarre little blast from the past.
All of it. Yeah. But I'm trying to paint a picture of what Javits Center for people who aren't familiar with Javits Center.
Well, it's a convention center. They're all pretty similar.
Yeah. But in Manhattan, it's hard to find the space. So it was giant. And the Plant-Based World Expo was very similar to any other. If you've been to Natural Food Expo West, or East, it's very similar to that, but it was all plant-based. And their whole tagline is "The future is plant-based." It is, I believe, the only 100% plant-based focus event that is specifically geared toward food service.
I just want to say, like, they should be naming their products Inevitable.
I know. No, believe me, I'm trying to trademark it as we're recording this, but I'm bad at multitasking. But anyway, yeah, it was definitely weird to go in COVID times because it doesn't, there's a little
everything
bit of
is weird in COVID times.
Well, yeah, but there's like fear when you're, you know, you don't want to really take a food sample, and everyone has masks on, obviously. And so that part of it was very different, but it was so much better to have only vegan food available. And it was just like aisle after aisle, a lot of brands I had heard of, but a lot I hadn't. You know, you've got your Dea, you've got your Beyond, you've got your Tofurky, you've got your Miyokos. In fact, I saw Miyoko, which was really cool. But you've also got a whole lot of up and coming brands, a lot of which are in the, you know, alternative protein market, a lot of which are mushroom focused, since mushrooms will probably save the world. So
mushrooms and algae, those are my two predictions for what's going to save the world.
There was also a lot of algae based companies too. Yeah. I had a great time. I also got to catch up with some people. I ran into some people I knew. One interesting story to me, hopefully to others, is that I had lunch with my friend Mike Kaplan, the comedian, and I was looking for a place to go near the Javits Center, and I was looking at Happy Cow, and I was looking to see if there was any vegan restaurants, and there were no vegan restaurants that I could find that were right there. So instead, I started looking at different restaurants that were right around there. And I found this very old school pizza place called Tavola, and it had a whole vegan menu. Like, this is the old school, like the old awning, the like, you know, old Italian waiters.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah. And there was a whole vegan menu, you know, and as I was walking there was a digital bus stop ad, and it was for Beyond Meat, partly because it was digital. I just really felt like I had somehow walked into the future. I'm leaving this giant vegan expo at Javits Center. I'm passing by a digital bus stop ad for Beyond Meat. I'm going to this old school vegan non-vegan restaurant that has like a whole vegan menu. It's the last place on earth you would imagine you'd find a vegan menu. So all in all, it was pretty epic. I would say the trip was wonderful.
No, that's exciting that you have been in New York City. You have moved from one place to another. The world is just full of excitement these days.
So I took Amtrak down because I'm not flying unless I absolutely have to. It's a very long Amtrak trip from Rochester. It's 7.5 hours, but I got my own little room on it because of COVID and because I had to work. So it was just my office for the whole day. And I had brought some food with me, like squirrel food, you know, like nuts and granola or whatever. And I knew that there was a vegan burger on Amtrak, but there were plant-based enchiladas, complete with vegan meat and vegan cheese.
Crazy.
So I know.
Actually, Amtrak has always been good. I mean, they've had a burger for a long time, but that's really impressive.
Yeah. Yeah. It was really cool. Like, it is suddenly not that weird to be the vegan.
Now we have to get to the point where it's weird to not be vegan.
Exactly.
Next goal.
I think Monica Chen's going to help us get there, our guest today.
Yeah, I think she might be leading that charge. So let's get to that interview because you could not stop talking about it. Mm-hmm. So Monica Chen is the executive director of the Factory Farming Awareness Coalition, which is an educational nonprofit that contributes to the eradication of factory farming through a range of educational programs. There, Monica has overseen the development of a unique internship program for high school and college students, combining research, service, and advocacy. A veteran teacher, she has taught at all grade levels and as an instructor for the Prison University Project at San Quentin. And she will be joining Jasmine right after this. Social media has become such an important part of almost all of our lives. So please make our hen house part of that social media experience for you. You can like us on Facebook. You can follow us on Twitter or Instagram. We try to post some news stories to help you keep up to date on what's happening in the world for animals. You can also find us online, of course, on our website, ourhenhouse.org, or you can email us. If you have some concerns or questions or something you'd like us to discuss on the podcast, let us know. info@ourhenhouse.org.
Welcome to our hen house, Monica.
Hi, Jasmine. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm so excited to interview you. I have so much respect for the work you do. I am personally thrilled that you're a flock member. We all did like a happy dance when you became a flock member. We're like, Monica! It was like Joaquin Phoenix became a flock member or something. We were so excited. So I'll just start by saying thank you for all you do. And speaking of all you do, I have so many questions for you today. And in case there are some people unaware of the work of the Factory Farming Awareness Coalition, can you just start out with, let's say, your elevator speech, and then we'll get into detail?
Sure. So Factory Farming Awareness Coalition is known for educational programming, primarily with high school and college students. And we've been reaching tens of thousands of students every single year across the United States for over a decade since Katie Cantrell founded it. And from all of our presentations, primarily in classrooms, we've been recruiting student advocates. And it is that student advocates program that I'm really excited to talk about, because that's what we've really seen grow during the pandemic. We're training people to be animal advocates.
Yeah, I'm excited about that too. And also interesting timing with the pandemic with that. So let's get into it. Obviously, that is one of your major areas of focus, the student advocate program. And that includes both a high school and a college program, right?
Yes, it does. And what's really unique about our approach is that we understand factory farming's interconnections with other social justice issues, with public health issues, with the environment. And so we're recruiting students who do not necessarily come to us as like self-identified vegans or animal rights activists. They come to us as members of the Sunrise Movement, for example, where they really care about climate change. And I know that this makes a lot of sense to you. We care a lot about what the future of the world is going to be. And are there ways for us to incorporate factory farming and what we're eating into the Green New Deal, for example? And so those students come to us, they learn about these connections, they can bring it back to their organizations and their other work.
I love the Sunrise Movement is really one of the, I want to say one of the few things that gives me hope, but I won't be so dismal because what you're doing gives me hope, but I am given a lot of hope by that particular movement. So just kind of backpedaling momentarily, what types of topics are covered in your programs?
It's really extensive. We've obviously had to cover the pandemic and connections to our relationship with animals. We talk about ableism, sexism, racism, environmental racism, speciesism. We want to prepare them so that then when they go into their campus cafeterias and they're speaking to the sustainability chefs or directors, they're able to articulate the connections between greenhouse gas emissions and our food choices. So there's a lot of different aspects to our programming because there's so many different ways in which our students can be advocates.
I was looking at the information that we were sent and I noticed that like there's lobbying 101 and how to change minds, like theories of persuasion, public speaker training, mental health, sustainable activism. I was like, sign me up. So let's talk specifically about the high school mentorship program. Is this online?
So this program started off in person, and then with the pandemic, we shifted to online. And the benefit of being online, of course, is that we can speak to students and recruit students that aren't just in our core geographic regions, of which there are 6. And the mentorship program has now turned into this online component, but we also offer as many, in-person meetups as possible.
And how do you connect with the students? Like, are the schools part of it, or is it totally independent?
Well, recruitment is really an interesting process, we have learned. But I think that what really prepares us to reach all of these advocates is because we're speaking to tens of thousands of students in their classrooms every single day. And that's really one of the primary ways that we recruit. Of course, you know that students are on social media, especially these days. So that's another, avenue. But certainly it's been primarily through schools or some of the partnerships that we have sort of developed over time with various organizations that we work with.
Can you walk us through what a student would expect to find and do if they become part of this program?
The high schoolers are matched with college students. And so that's a really interesting relationship because they are getting support in a lot of different areas. A typical high school student has been really impacted by the pandemic. They've spent a lot of time at home. I think that mental health has definitely been a really big challenge. So having that peer support has been very helpful. And especially because many of them are thinking about applying to college and what they want to do with their lives. And they're just starting to grapple with all this information. You might remember when you first learned about the terror that is factory farming and animal exploitation. It's a lot to consider, and it really impacts how you view the world. So those relationships, that community is important. They also go through a curriculum where they learn about these different topics, and they have discussion hours in cohorts. So I think that we limit our cohorts to about 15 or 16 students per discussion leader. And that really creates the intimacy where students can be very honest with each other about how they're receiving this information, processing it, making connections. And then we also have workshop speakers, and we're very fortunate to be really connected in the animal rights movement, to have folks from, the Humane League, Encompass. I think you've had Arianish, you've talked to her. So there's a lot of different folks that can come and speak to our students and just raise more awareness of different aspects. And the sustainability component that you mentioned is critical for us because, and this is just coming from, my background and the background of all these staff members who care so much and have many times throughout our careers just felt really burnt out, really stressed. And we want to make sure that it's different for our students, that they have a lot more support and they don't put the extreme pressure that some of us have put on ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's so great that you're covering this from all angles. And you also have a national college internship program. How does that differ?
The project work hours are more intensive at the college level. And I guess that's a component of the high school program that I did not yet mention. But there are a lot of ways in which our students can advocate for change, and they work with our staff to figure out how they want to be spending their time. So if they want to work on bringing more plant-based food to their cafeterias, then that's a project that they will receive specialized coaching in, support from the Better Food Foundation and other organizations. Basically, we have like these coaching hours. We also have these elective hours where students can sort of choose which sessions they want to attend. Some of them are a lot more social. Some of them, they're learning a lot about a different topic, such as lobbying. So it's a little bit of a mix of mandatory and then a choose your own adventure.
Oh my gosh. I remember choose your own adventure books. You just really brought me back. Turn to page 35 if you want her to go on the school camping trip, and turn to page 42 if you don't. Anyway, I digress. So how has the pandemic influenced how you function vis-a-vis schools? I'd love to hear both positives and negatives.
It's really changed so much, Jasmine. I think that in many ways, 2020 was just such a shock to everybody. There's a stat that we used to give in our presentations, which was if everybody, just started to eat more plant-based products one day a week, it would be like taking 7.6 million cars off of the road. And at the time when I said that, it seemed inconceivable. And then in March of 2020, there were a lot less cars on the road. And it just really made me realize that this whole way that we have of being and of existing in the world doesn't necessarily have to be this way. Like, things can change. But 2020 was really stressful for us because our core programming had been our outreach in schools, and also not just schools, but in corporations, for example. But those corporations weren't having their luncheons in person anymore. They weren't bringing us in. Church groups that we were also, or religious faith and values-based communities, they weren't having us. And so a lot of it had to become virtual, but we were really all about persevering. It was just, let's take care of our staff, let's take care of our community, and see what we can do. And then in 2021, we really had time to really think through more thoughtfully where we're headed as an organization and what we want to do. And the Student Advocates Program, I think, has become a much larger focus for our organization over time, because we're really recognizing that from the beginning, we were hoping that FFAC has not existed because we want to just pay ourselves. We just want to have another nonprofit exist in the world. I don't want to be doing this work just because can we actually be helpful? Are we adding anything to this movement? There's no ego in this for me at all. It's really hard work. But what we've realized is that our approach of just sharing the information with volunteers, it was good. And there were certainly some volunteers that could take our presentations, for example, and run with it, but they needed a lot more training. And we recognized that our student advocates could be those volunteers, quote unquote. We could really train them. And there's so much background knowledge necessary. Some people think that you can just take the presentations, that you can follow the script, and then you're good to go. And to a certain extent, that's true. But there's just a lot more background knowledge that's necessary. And at this point, we have over 500 different slides that we put together. We're meticulously updating all the time. And we want our student advocates, we want our staff to be able to choose the slides that will most appeal to different audiences. And that's what's critical here, because there are certain audiences that really resonate with me in the way that I speak, but I have to change my message with different groups of people that I'm speaking to, right? There's a big difference between speaking to, 350.org group versus speaking to 6th grade middle school students or, students from a different background than mine. Different presenters might resonate more with different populations. So we really want to be reaching folks beyond just what we have traditionally been reaching as an animal rights movement.
So I always say to advocates, like it's almost like we need a psychology degree, because we are constantly needing to read the room. We're constantly needing to understand the best communication tactic for the person in front of us or for the, institution that we're working within. So I'm admiring the way you're pivoting your messaging accordingly. Now, you mentioned that it's not just schools. Before I ask you a few more questions about the education program, can you just tell us a little bit more about the other types of venues where you have been educating people about factory farming and how you find these opportunities? Like you mentioned religious organizations like churches and corporate environments, but how do you get in there?
Yeah, I think that a lot of it is associated with networking. We ran Veg Fest for a while, and we just got to know more people who weren't just young folks in the school environments. Some of it comes from our partners. I recently had the privilege of speaking to the city of Mountain View, which was really exciting. And we've certainly done some municipal work, especially in the state of California. For the faith and values-based communities, I think that it came from our staff connections with different communities.
That's interesting, because I think a lot of people who listen to our hen house or who are flock members who come to our Flock Friday Zoom meetings, they're like, if only I could reach my church. I hear people saying to me, they talk about compassion and this and that. Where is the disconnect here, and how can I get in? And there's a lot of frustration for people that I hear, especially who are involved in other different social justice realms where there is a big focus on equity and justice and as well as these other communities in our lives that focus on compassion and kindness and showing up better. And I hear you saying, oh yeah, we speak to those communities. And I'm like, well, that's why I'm so focused on how, because maybe I want to know how because of the work you're doing, but I also want to know how on behalf of our listeners who want to reach the leaders in their, affiliations, so that they could also have an opportunity to educate.
I think that there's a huge investment in time that's necessary. One of my colleagues works with environmental organizations. She cannot just go to that organization and say, all right, here's the thing. You all need to adopt Default Veg or Green Monday right now. She has to be a part of all those committee meetings. She needs to understand what the values are. We have a staff member who's working as a hub coordinator for Sunrise, and she's had to really look through the values, attend those meetings, step up in a lot of different ways so that her message can be heard, so that she has connections and support. My background is being a teacher. So I attended Teachers for Social Justice, which is a big conference here in San Francisco that I hope will be back in person. And I was able to present there and talk to more teachers and get to know more folks and offering professional development opportunities. And that happened because of that background and because I kept on linking it to things that community really cared about: race, for example, immigration status, and so on.
I think that's really important. I remember many years ago when I first went vegan and I was living in the city and I was in my 20s, and I actually met Marisa. Do you know Marisa Miller-Wolfson from Vegucated? She made Vegucated. She was a very close friend of mine at the time, and she was involved in her Unitarian Universalist church. And I met her because I had another friend who was in the Unitarian Universalist church. So I kind of got, I would go to their picnics, and Marisa would always have the vegan sandwich. So that's how I met Marisa. That's how I went vegan. But she was very involved at the time with getting the Unitarian Universalist community to really step up what they were doing for animals. And I think you're right. you got to put in the hours. You got to show up at the meetings. You got to like really understand it. You can't just foist your flyer on people. Like, even though so many of us want to do it because it's the right thing to do, is to like boycott factory farming, boycott animal agriculture. But it's a good reminder that we can't just, boom.
I actually, by the way, Jasmine, was hesitant to call myself an animal rights activist for a really long time. In many ways, I felt like the movement didn't really even want me to join back over 10 years ago. And so my background really was in environmental education. I did do this work in prisons. I did do this work in certain LGBTQ and health communities. And so I have all that as part of my background experience and my identities. And I call upon that as I still do my work today.
Monica, can we talk about that? I'm curious about why you didn't feel there was a place for you here?
Well, when I was in college, I remember that our hen house had started to come out, by the way. So that was one of the wonderful influences that I did have. But back then, I felt like one of the main forms of activism was around leafleting, or at least that was what was clearly accessible to me. I didn't think that the animal rights movement was really a place where people could have careers. Salaries were still lower back then. I think that our movement has grown substantially. But there was just like a lot of messaging in the animal rights movement that, we can look back on today and go like, oh, was that potentially excluding certain folks? Some of it's related to, veganism as weight loss, there are certain ways that you should be, there are certain ways that you talk about it. And certainly culturally, it had been a little bit challenging for me to, find my fit.
I agree. I have had to ask myself the hard questions about like, was I doing enough for all of the many years I've been in the quote unquote animal rights movement? Like, was I fighting for true inclusivity enough? And, the answer is no, which is something that I'm glad that things are shifting. I feel like I've shifted. I feel like our hen house has shifted. I feel like it was really late. It should have happened at the very beginning. It should have been built on the basis of inclusivity. And there's been such problematic language around, anti-fat bias and, just kind of like not at all inclusivity, but exclusivity. And it's been a giant problem. But you say that you feel it's shifting. Is that accurate? Do you feel like it is shifting?
Yeah, well, FFAC and Katie's approach has always been about meeting people where they're at, not shaming people, being thoughtful in our language. But a little over 10 years ago, there were books that said, if you don't look a certain way, then you are a bad person. Essentially, they said that. And I had experiences of leafleting and really feeling a lot of pressure to look a certain way in order to be the best animal activist I could be, to really represent veganism. That was a burden that I put on myself back then. And I just saw that reinforced in a lot of the language that we were sharing around the health connection to veganism. And of course, there are health connections to veganism. I'm not saying that there aren't, but that just some of the ways in which it was approached was really hard for me as a young college student at the time.
I remember being at an event, I think I was speaking at it, and one of the other speakers was showing a slideshow of like how to be a great activist. And one of the slides was showing leafleters, and it was showing like what you shouldn't look like and what you should look like. And the what you should look like was portrayed by a white man in a suit. And there was like this whole kind of thing behind that. Like a lot of the men who were showing up at this place and in grassroots advocacy as a whole, that's how they were showing up. And that's what was expected of them. And also that was what was reflected in the leadership of the institutional animal protection movement. So it is hard to believe that it was so recent that was what was going on. And I'm sure a lot of that kind of culture in the animal rights movement still is true today because it takes a while to get that out. But I'm really grateful for the work that FFAC is doing. As you know, I'm a giant fan of Katie. Like, love her. Are your presentations outside of schools also predominantly or completely online? And I'm curious, if so, do you expect that to change as our relationship with the pandemic shifts?
That's why when people say to me, "Oh gosh, Monica, it's so hard for you to be executive director. Like Katie gets cancer, and then there's the pandemic, but now we're coming out of it and it's easier." I would actually say that 2021 has actually been more challenging, and the reason why is because we really struggled to figure out this whole hybrid environment. Do we continue to have staff in certain regions, knowing that they won't be able to attend maybe a quarter of their presentations in person? And I still don't know. And then, we've really planned a lot of events, staff retreats, certain veg fest, whatever, and things just get canceled over and over and over again. So that's really challenging. But I hope so. I mean, you can see that a lot of students are now getting more vaccinated. You can see that in some regions, schools are actually opening up. And it really does vary by region, Jasmine. In the Bay Area, in New York, for example, I think that it's been really difficult for us to do in person. And then in regions like Salt Lake City, I think that we started to go back in person in the spring. Colorado this fall has been a lot of in person. Yeah, fascinating.
Yeah, that is hard to navigate given the work that you do, like our hen house is much different because we're not a campaign organization. We've always been entirely virtual, like because of A, the podcasts, and B, just all of the events we have are virtual. We have done some in-person events, but they're like, few and far between, and it is a no-brainer, super easy. But yeah, for a campaign organization, educational organization, that can definitely be challenging. You've mentioned climate change a few times, and I'd love to just chat about that. Do you think that people are starting to become more aware of the connections between animal agriculture and climate change?
Yes, I would say so. I think that there's still a lot of rhetoric, especially where I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, around just trying really hard to find more ways to eat animals, but perhaps in the most sustainable way, which can be really challenging because not everybody is able to afford this regenerative, pasture raised, et cetera, meal. I do find, though, that overall, many of the adult audiences that I speak to have some inkling that there is a connection. I think that our messaging has gotten out there. And that's why we've been able to go and speak to all these corporations. Here in Silicon Valley, there are many tech companies that when I talk to their sustainability directors, they're like, yes, I do know about this. I think that this is actually not even going to be controversial to discuss, especially if you approach it this way, like from, the greenhouse gas emissions perspective. So yes, I would say that there is greater awareness. What I think is more interesting, though, Jasmine, is that our students are starting to see connections in a way that I didn't when I was a student. So when I was learning about climate change, it really did feel very far away. It felt as though there was going to be some island in the Pacific Ocean that I had never been to that might be underwater someday. And I could not understand how it was actually going to impact those of us or my community. Of course, I was thinking about my community a lot. And now our students can recognize that there are, over here in California, wildfires, and the smoke is horrific. You love California,
There were like flames behind my car as I was driving out. Like it was very like a cartoon, very dramatic.
It's the reality. And our students can see that there are people who do not have homes, do not have air purifiers, who do not do remote work, and they might not have N95 masks, and they can actually point that out and name it as environmental racism. This is the consequence. So for students to be recognizing that, to seeing those impacts, and just really very conscious about what the world that we are living in now and where the world will be like when they become adults, I mean, that's a really strong motivator. There's a lot of passion there. And again, connections are being made now in ways that they weren't a decade ago.
I actually got chills from what you just said. Like, it is good to hear. What about labor issues? I know that this is something you focus on. Are people shocked when they learn about the working conditions on factory farms and slaughterhouses?
Yeah, they absolutely are very concerned. I think that actually labor might be one of the ways in which we're able to reach more people. I've heard Mercy for Animals talk a lot about their farm transition project and how that is actually something that is really resonating with huge numbers of folks that they speak to. And I get that, because oftentimes when we talk about factory farming, a lot of people are concerned about what will happen to those factory farmers, what will happen to those slaughterhouse workers. And this is an opportunity for us to show who we really are, which is compassionate folks that do care about all beings, including the people who are a part of this system. When we talk about the conditions, especially of the late night cleaning crew, we do so very much from a place of compassion. We recognize that this is a terrible situation. And not a lot of people grow up wanting to one day work at the late night cleaning crew of a slaughterhouse facility, but this is what it is. And this is all that has contributed. And we talk about drug dependency, alcoholism, et cetera. And I, by the way, come from a background in crisis support services. And so I sometimes ask folks, instead of just blaming people and just saying, oh, this is a population with, these issues, why is there this emphasis on alcohol in certain communities? What is it about these jobs that has led to people, wanting to turn to another substance?
Within the very large scope of topics that you cover, what do you feel are the most controversial ones? The ones that people resist the most?
I think that there's still some part of me that is always hesitant with certain audiences to go super deep into the conditions for animals on factory farms. But we talk about it at every single presentation. And the reason why is because we're trying to say this is a system that is exploitative, and the way that we're exploiting animals does have a ripple effect everywhere else. So we're thoughtful about how we share that information. And it's been really interesting to see how deep you can go with certain audiences. I really like speaking to students because it can turn into a little bit of a philosophical conversation. They might ask me, Monica, if we just derive pleasure and it's tasty to us, then it's okay. And sometimes we'll do weird hypothetical situations. Like, say I really enjoyed kicking dogs and hearing the cracking of their bones, and that just gave me a tremendous pleasure. Would that then justify, this hurting of animals? And pushing that with students and getting them to come to their own conclusions around why it's wrong to be exploiting animals in this manner that we are on these factory farms. It's fascinating because I can say it, Jasmine, but it's so much more powerful when students come to their own conclusions and really recognize the impact that they can have in choosing to eat differently, but also being part of various campaigns. We're thinking about systemic solutions, institutional level solutions, and also individual.
Well, I know that one of the problems in educating people about factory farming is that it's so bad, it's so horrible, that people just want to turn away and shut down. How do you handle that?
The biggest thing is to just come in very humbly. Sometimes we've had presenters in different regions where the students come to the school in bacon costumes. They're just ready to fight. They're ready to be antagonistic. But if you can be humorous, if you can connect with your audience and just say from the beginning that, and sometimes really even acknowledging that this might be how you're perceiving us, but really this is what we can all agree on, what are our shared values, that's what's really powerful. So knowing what will resonate with your audience is really important.
But do you think that there's any kind of something inherently sad about the fact that we often have to sidestep the suffering of animals in order to get our message across because people sometimes just don't see it as important, but the climate impacts them. So they'll see that as important, or the slaughterhouse workers' conditions feel closer to home because of our inherent speciesism. So that will work. But what about the animals? I mean, I actually don't know how I feel about this. On a strategic level, I think, well, whatever, we do what we need to do to get people to stop consuming animals. But on an emotional level, it makes me sad. And I don't know where to put that. What are your thoughts?
First of all, Jasmine, we've done many surveys. We have thousands of data points over and over again. The section of our presentation that really resonates with students that they remember is the animal section. So that, I think, should give you a lot of hope because it shows that our students are actually very empathetic people, that they can recognize that this is cruelty. So there's that. I'd say that I struggle with this question a lot, Jasmine, because I do have to think really strategically about what is going to be accepted by the audience. And unfortunately, I don't believe that it's that adults do not care about animals, but they are dealing with a lot of other challenges. They're dealing with the stereotypes of veganism and everything that has happened in our movement, some of which we've been talking about earlier. And some of the language that has been used. Some of it is relating to concerns about liabilities. Sometimes we speak to audiences and the teachers or the principals will suddenly become very concerned that there's going to be backlash. So we're living in a society where people are like really scared to touch certain topics, but fundamentally on an emotional level, yes, people do care about animals.
I'm glad to hear it. The other day I was talking to someone, a friend of mine who has worked in the movement forever, just for so long, way longer than me. And she just was having a moment, as we do. And I know you have a strong focus on mental health and self-care. She said, I just feel like we've lost. She just was like in a dark spot. She was like, just don't see the point anymore in like fighting for this. And I think it's because the victories are few and far between and they're hard to quantify sometimes. Can you just sort of speak to that? Like, if you're confronted with someone who thinks, what's the point? I've been doing this for so long. Animals are still exploited. Climate change is bad. How do you deal with it? How do you bring them out of that? Or do you even try?
Well, what are your metrics? Like, what are the victories to you? Because I have this conversation with a lot of different people. If the clear goal is and you're only measuring the number of people who suddenly go vegan, and that's something that we did try and measure at some point, and then translate that into number of animals being saved, that was really a difficult exercise for us. And you can look at the growing global US population and see that the percentage of vegans has stayed relatively similar to what it was even 10 years ago. But what has changed is the availability of the plant-based products and more people buying those plant-based products and more of the, plant forward movement growing, right? So that is a victory in itself. So I think that's important to really challenge the metric of what success is looking like. Another example is with legislation. A lot of the bills that support animal rights do not turn into law, right? But what I do see is our students actually going and speaking to their legislators. And even if it doesn't pass, they educated that legislator. That's a victory right there as well, right? So it can't always just be measured by what has passed, the number of vegans and so on, the exact number of animals saved. There are successes. And for me, I have to think through, what is our place in the movement? What are we going to be doing to achieve impact? For us, I think that it's about empowering people and really broadening our movement into other social justice, environmental health spaces. That's where I'm seeing a lot of success, right? I mean, for environmental groups to start to really recognize, even on their websites, the factory farming animal connection, that's a big victory. It can't be discounted. That was not something that we could just say was an absolute, yeah, we all agree 10 years ago.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of the ways that different issues sort of come together, there has been such an incredible rise of Black veganism. And with this rise, are you seeing more awareness grow about the connections between food justice and racial justice?
Yeah, I think so. I'm very fortunate to live in an area where we have a wonderful cooperative. It's called Mandela Grocery Cooperative. My mom is actually one of the assistants there, but it's all a Black-owned worker co-op here in Oakland. And I see it being a real center of community. And I get to experience shopping there and just talking to other customers and talking with the staff. And I really do recognize that there is more growing awareness of this labor issue, with racial justice issues, and with animal rights. And that is actually, I think, one of the aspects of our curriculum that resonates the most with students.
I think that I have seen that too in my little corners here in the work that I do. I think people are very interested in that aspect of it. How do you go about educating folks on how to shift diets and facilitating that, in addition to telling them the why? Like, what happens after they're exposed to your work and they're like, oh, okay, I get it. I want to make a change. Do you just like say, okay, good luck and leave? Or like, what's the next step for them?
To connect it to racial justice or just race in general, I can give an example of how I might do this, speaking to a certain audience. So I am Chinese, and I am somebody who has grown up eating tofu. It's just that tofu, it's a big part of my culture and my heritage. But tofu, I've heard you talk about slimy tofu in some podcast episodes before. And it is true that there is this perception that tofu makes you weak, that it is, going to give you boobs if you are a man, and it is a bland, plain food. And when I speak to students, I definitely hear a lot of that. And I've been really interested in speaking to some gender and women's studies classes, some courses that are focusing more on race and justice. And we'll talk about the history of tofu, how Chinese people have been perceived in the United States, the emasculation of Chinese men, especially after the Transcontinental Railroad was built. And then there was this real concern that Chinese men were going to take the jobs of white laborers. And then they were then forced into laundry service, for example. And, what people were eating was then associated with being weak. And it's been very fascinating to have these conversations with students. And I speak to a lot of Asian students here in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area. And we talk about some of these connections and why we are eating, why certain foods have certain stereotypes. And then to the Asian students, I will say, like, what are some of our ancestral foods? What are some of the foods that we've been eating for a long time? Can we go and explore some of that? Because you and I both know that veganism doesn't have to just limit you to certain foods, that there are many people who start eating more plant-based and actually grow the amount of foods that they're eating. But when I speak to some audiences and they say, and they're immigrants, I ask them, how many of you since coming to the United States have started to eat more animal products? Every single kid will raise their hand, right? So there's something about the standard American diet where it's just like, we need to eat more animal products. So we talk about culturally, what else can we be eating? And we have an array of options there. And definitely the availability of those products is wonderful. I used to live in New Mexico on the Navajo reservation, and the Walmart there where a lot of people did get their food was extraordinarily limited. But now you can see that with the growing demand for these plant-based products, it is available, and we can just talk about trying to add something in, trying something that you haven't bought before.
I think tofu is like 90% of my diet. Like, there's so many different ways of preparing tofu. I feel like when I've made a reference to slimy tofu, I've probably been talking about others' perceptions of like what vegans eat. And it's just, if I am not even a good cook. I'm a pretty bad cook, actually. But even for my skill level, if I fed someone the tofu I eat, prepared all the various different ways, they'd be mind boggled that that's tofu. I feel like I could have a whole episode on the joy and beauty of tofu. But you mentioned being Chinese. What has been your experience personally as a Chinese American woman in a leadership role in the AR movement?
I don't know if there are any other Chinese American women in leadership or as executive directors in the animal rights movement. It's interesting. It brings together, as whenever I think about it, it just brings together a lot of different experiences and identities. Here in the United States, eating tofu is sometimes seen as different. But whenever I go back to Taiwan, my grandfather, who many might describe as masculine, he eats tofu, and he never questioned me when he's just saying, oh yeah, we should go and have some soy milk. There wasn't like this, oh, like I get you kind of thing. It was just, this is normally what we eat. So it's interesting being here in a country where there's so many perceptions about different people and what they eat and their capabilities. I think that that the animal rights movement has had a lot of leadership, primarily white people, a lot of men in leadership positions as well at various nonprofits. I do believe that there is growing support for leaders of color. And I hope that as we think about why it's important to have leaders of color, we recognize the ripple impact that it can have. I don't think that people should be supporting me or FFAC just because I am a person of color. I feel that the benefit to supporting me is that I can connect with certain students and they will see themselves in me and be able to think to themselves, oh, I could join the animal rights movement. I can, be a part of FFAC and other organizations, and I can lend my talents, and there's a place for me. I see myself reflected here.
I love that answer. Yeah, I absolutely hope so too. I have had similar conversations with a friend of mine who's Chinese American, who is an actress, and just about all, like, there's been such a similar shift within Hollywood in the last few years. And like, she has been doing this for, more than 20 years. We were in a theater company together 20 years ago. That's how we met. And just to see the struggles she's had and now coming into like some pretty impressive success, because it seems like people in all different industries, including the movie industry, the TV industry is like starting to understand the importance of thinking outside of stereotypes. But I just remember 20 years ago, she was auditioning for a part that she did ultimately get. And she was playing a ballerina in this movie, this independent movie. And she felt like she had to lose so much weight because she was kind of like, just not thin enough for like what the perception of like a Chinese American ballet dancer would be. And like all of it from food to, is there a place for her? So I hope this is a hopeful moment for us societally. I hope this is a moment where we've broken something open. I hope that there is like a space for growth and for true inclusivity and for like understanding on a very deep level the necessity of moving beyond the societal norms or whatever they have been, the white created societal norms, when there are so many other societal norms that exist and have forever.
Yeah.
I fucking hope so.
Yeah, I hope so too. I mean, at the same time, during this whole period of the pandemic, I have unfortunately dealt with people calling me out, trying to fight me as I'm walking around Lake Merritt because they think that I brought like the Chinese virus. I did see the people who are Chinese and elderly being attacked in front of me. And so it's definitely been a really challenging time. So, I hope that it's, fully cracked, but, I can say at least like, I do think that there's some cracking happening, even if it's not fully open.
Right. I feel similarly about the LGBTQ movement, like just so many people think, oh, we're good now. Like we're good. You guys are welcome here. Right. And I'm like, yeah, I might be as like a cisgender white lesbian in a lot of places, not in every place. But like, what about like, Black trans women? They're not really welcome at the table yet. So to your point about, I probably overly stated that we have cracked something open when we're just starting to get those little cracks. So when people learn about the horrors of factory farming, I have found that their first impulse, and you mentioned this earlier, I wanted to go back to this, is to generally find like humane, quote unquote, humane farm. How do you deal with questions like that when you get them? It's like the construct in people's minds is eat meat or, oh, wow, look at the horror going on. I guess I'll eat humane meat. They don't, it's not even something they think about, like to stop eating it.
Well, and again, that's why if we can spend more time on the animal section, it really is valuable because you can fundamentally agree that there is cruelty associated with this entire industry, whether it's factory farmed or not. And we'll go in and, when I talk about the example of the ribs cracking of a dog and the enjoyment I get out of it, right? If you're thinking about it in those terms, then it doesn't matter how an animal is raised humanely, however we define that. Like we are killing this animal for ourselves. But actually, I invite this conversation. I do want to make sure that we talk about labels because that's what is part of our experience when we go into a grocery store and go into Trader Joe's. You look for cage-free eggs, pasture-raised eggs. And so we'll talk about some very specific examples. I give, because I'm in the Bay Area, I talk about Judy's Family Farm and how they have said on their package that it's just, they paint this really idyllic picture. And we actually have an aerial shot of what Judy's Family Farm actually looks like. And compare that to, So that's a good example there. I sometimes will ask students if any of them have chickens in their backyard. And sometimes there is a student who does or knows somebody who does. And I say, okay, well, how many eggs do you get per day? And they'll say, 1 or sometimes 0. And I say, is that enough to provide Trader Joe's with eggs to sell to the public? And of course, the answer is no. So when we look at scale, that's not possible.
That's interesting. I haven't taken that. Like, I love talking about backyard birds. It's like one of my favorite topics if I'm doing a veganism workshop, just because I just love talking about all of the things people don't realize, from how they're shipped in the mail to how they come from the same hatcheries to how they stop producing eggs, just like human animals do. And but I have actually never thought about talking about it from the perspective of scale.
Because in a classroom environment, we're trying to think about this very large problem. And sometimes we just try and take things to their logical conclusion. So if you are really trying to say that these backyard hens, that's what we're going to provide, this is the ideal, it really cannot be that way because many people are eating eggs every single day.
It's funny because I do find that still a lot of people who aren't vegan, but who sort of are aware of the issues, they still don't consider chickens important or important enough. Like within speciesism, I think it's the chickens who are just like who are so much at the bottom of this ladder that shouldn't exist at all. So I know people who will just be really eager to tell me about the changes they've made. And they're like, and I'm only buying pasteurized eggs, or I'm only buying organic grass, whatever. And I don't quite always know how to respond, because you want to be celebratory of someone's changes or they get it. And I mean, I'll often just be like, I think you should try Just Egg next time you're at the grocery store. Like, get a little package of Just Egg because it tastes just the same, and like no animals have to be hurt for it. But how do you deal with that? Like, if people become so sort of awakened, but like yet there's still these hard lines in the sand.
I approach it the same way that, when people are talking about environmental changes that they've made and they are starting to drive like a more efficient car, for example, that gets more miles per gallon, but that you're still contributing to the larger issues that we have around fossil fuels, and it's still contributing to climate change. You can say that. I think that's a great step. And then there's also this. So in the case of these eggs, I think that it is great that you're really thinking about this and you're trying to make a choice. I also was really interested in that. And then I learned X, Y, and Z about how these chickens are produced at Judy's Family Farm, for example. So I always try and make sure that nobody feels shame, that I can really support at least that they're thinking about this. And that's true for most of the audiences that I speak to, at least in the Bay Area. There's some awakening that is happening. They're relatively cognizant that there is some issue, and so they're looking to their supermarkets to help guide them. And so they're making that choice. They are, might be paying more money than they would otherwise. So I want to really recognize that you're making an effort, that you are thinking about these things, and then sharing some additional knowledge that I've learned.
I do recognize that what other people think of us isn't really our business. I understand that is how we're supposed to go through the world. That's your problem if you don't like me. But maybe because I agree with you about everything you've said, I think you come across as very grounded, very humble, very, approachable. But I agree with you. And I'm just wondering how you deal with not coming across as self-righteous.
I don't put myself on a pedestal. I am very uncomfortable with being a guru, with being somebody who is, and that this is partially also why, Jasmine, when we talk about, the big fundamental shift that has happened for me in the last 10 years around body image and being the best vegan that I can be, I don't look at it that way anymore. I'm not trying to be a star representative, and I don't think that I'm a perfect person. All I can do is share my thought process and how I've been thinking about things and learning more.
Well, I think that that's all we can do. And it's ironic because vegans have this reputation for ever that we're, how do you know if vegans at a party, they'll tell you kind of thing. Well, I actually find the opposite is true. How do you know if there's a meat eater at a party? They'll tell the vegan. You know what I mean? There's such a stigma, but maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe as we grow, the stigma lessens and lessens. I hope so. I mean, I think that we as a movement can learn a lot from the trajectory of the mainstream acceptance in certain parts of the LGBTQ community. And I say certain parts, as I mentioned earlier, but certainly just 20 years ago, it was on Will and Grace, that's it. 25 years ago, I guess that was Will and Grace. God, I'm old. but I was in high school I graduated high school 25 years ago, and that was it. It was Will and Grace. And there was so much more to do. And then suddenly we had marriage equality, and things have happened so quickly that I think a lot of people don't really realize how quickly the LGBTQ movement went from truly on the margins, or at least a lot of the LGBTQ movement, truly on the margins, to normal. Everyone knows someone, or is close friends with someone, or is gay themselves. It's different with the trans community, especially the trans community of color, but that gives me hope. Speaking of hope, if that can happen, if AIDS could go from being known as the gay disease to being something that is very much destigmatized at this point in many communities, not in all communities, then I am hopeful that we can follow that lead. I'm talking a lot. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. And again, there was so much that happened that were successes that wasn't just, marriage equality, right? There were so many ways for us to measure a success, and it was Will and Grace was one of those successes, but it was significant, but it's not like suddenly everything was okay after that, but it helped, right? So that's again like what I want to say to your friend who's really going through some tough times and really, evaluating, am I making any kind of difference? There are so many ways in which, we have subtle impacts. And that's really critical for our students to understand as well, because I really worry, and this is, I think, a major challenge that we have in talking about such devastating information. I want to make sure that our students recognize that there, again, are systemic level changes that need to happen, but also as an individual, you have an impact, not even just with like your individual choices, but on the people around you. So when one of our students goes to Burger King, right, and they order the vegan Impossible Burger Whopper, right, that has an impact on the people around them, their friends. And conversely, can you imagine what would happen if you're with a group of friends and all your friends order the vegan Impossible Whopper? If you're truly honest with yourself, don't you also feel pretty compelled to order the vegan Impossible Whopper? So there is a dynamic, there is an influence that we have on the people around us that is greatly contributing to overall destigmatization. Exactly what I see happening with AIDS life cycle, which is huge here.
Yeah. Wow. That is also really hopeful. The impossible, like when my memoir came out in 2016, and I talked a lot about how I grew up sort of eating the Burger King was my great love. And I would go to the shadowy part of the parking lot, when I could drive and I was 17, and I would go to the shadowy hidden part of the parking lot and like eat it in private. And there was a lot of shame around food and this and that. Well, in 2016, I was on tour with my book, and I was like reading excerpts from my book about this. And then suddenly I'm reading excerpts, and you can go to Burger King and get the vegan version of that, because part of the excerpt was also like talking about how I didn't even think about what I was eating. It was, or the cruelty behind what I was eating. And suddenly my book was almost, that part of my book was obsolete. There were other parts too, like about getting high. And then when I was living in California, like suddenly it was legal to have, it's legal here too, but not really available, to have marijuana. There's so many things so quickly shift that it feels like unending. And I remember feeling like high school would be unending. And here I am now saying I graduated 25 years ago, but I remember being a freshman, a sophomore, a junior, and just being like, okay, it's never going to be over. If I were that age now and this program was available to me, I think I would have absolutely loved it, to find a greater purpose, to find community, and to find the caretaking around mental health. So let's talk about that briefly. I know this is important to you. We have talked about it a little bit on this interview, but can you tell me a little bit more about how you make sure to hold space for the emotional experiences of the young people that you work with?
Well, again, my background, I used to work for Alameda County Crisis Support Services as a volunteer suicide prevention counselor. Suicide has impacted my family's life and me personally. And I have seen it impacting our activist community as well. I've seen people do really challenging things like being undercover investigators and not getting the support that they needed. And it's greatly concerned me. So I recognize already that many of our students have been struggling, and not just students, of course, it's our whole broader community. And thinking about, there's again, like that cracking and a metaphor, right? There is something going on where there is more awareness, there is more information out there. And some of it is connected to the racism in our country, the structures that we have built. Some of it is related to just like being in complete isolation for over a year now, and your only interactions being over social media. And I just really want to help facilitate a space at FFAC for our students to come together, because there might be a student in Kansas, they may feel like they're the only one who's like really ready to talk about factory farming. And that can be an incredibly isolating experience, being the only student at your school. And so it's really important that we bring these students together so that they know that there are other people who care about these things too. And what I think is important is not to have judgment around what people are capable of doing and what their actions are. I want to just very much center that we are people who care. Now let's figure out like what we can do together. What are the specific supports that we can offer? And I think that our cohort leaders do a really remarkable job of, on the one hand, their role is to teach curriculum and to facilitate discussion. But I think that because our cohort leaders are folks who have either been in our programs or who have been working as staff members and are young people themselves, like we can recognize that there are certain ways in which we can interact and offer support and share stories. And again, like facilitate that being, relatively vulnerable, but also like creating this space for our students to feel like they can share. And that's really important.
So much of what you're speaking about reminds me of collective care, which is something that was coined by Patrisse Cullors of Black Lives Matter, one of the founders of Black Lives Matter, and just the importance of taking care of our community. And it's funny, like when my friend came to me, I just kept thinking of this illustration I saw of a Brené Brown talk on vulnerability. Obviously, it's her topic. And it was just basically an illustration of empathy and how empathy looks like really hearing someone and seeing where they are and meeting them where they are and being like, yeah, that sucks, like validating it. That sucks. I've been there too. And kind of not partaking in toxic positivity where it's like, you can get over this. It's all good. And I found myself really conflicted with like, how can I express empathy to this person while also helping to show them that there is a bright light, that there are other ways of, as you say, measuring victories. I don't want to come across as dismissive at all, especially when someone is expressing something very deep and very much rooted in despair. So I'm not sure what my question is here, but I guess I wanted to say I think it's like tremendously important that you're focusing on this aspect of activist growth.
Yeah. And I guess another thing that I'll add is that we are going up against marketing and industries that tell us that we need to buy things or like have more time. We need to, buy chocolates to feel better. We need to go on vacations and you need money for that. You need time to take bubble baths, all these things. And so I talk to our students about the structural changes that can happen. I don't pretend that there are magic solutions all the time, but for me, I'm an insomniac. I've struggled with this for a long time now. And for those people who have insomnia, that can be extraordinarily isolating. You're like, I'm the only person who's awake at this time of the night. It doesn't make any sense. But I found certain things that really helped me. For example, I've structured my life so that I try not to have meetings really early because I know that if I have really early meetings, then there's something about my head and anxiety around, waking up super early for these meetings and having to be on. So that was a shift that I was able to make, and FFAC can support that. So, and, I no longer live many states away. I choose to live in an area where I can have like my family and my strong friendship community, which is really important to me so that I can do my work. And everything that we've accomplished at FFAC, and I feel sometimes very uncomfortable being the executive director, being the face, because I know that it's really our staff and our community. I mean, I feel like I play actually a pretty small part in what our organization and our movement has been able to accomplish. And sometimes the credit does go to me, or, my face or my name is associated with it. But I can't do this work without my family and my friends and all of our volunteers and our staff.
Oh, that's so beautiful. I love the way that you're bringing community into your successes and ultimately the animals' successes, because I know that that's where your heart and your passion lies, is with the animals and with marginalized communities. And I'm just such a giant fan of yours and what you're doing. I always loved FFAC. And I think it's really cool to see the way it's shifted as the world has. I have more questions for you, but I'm wondering if you'll stay on with me for some bonus content. I can ask you some of those additional questions. I want to talk about Green Monday. I want to talk about your personal story coming into the organization. So would you mind hanging on for a little bit and we could chat about that?
Yes, it'd be my pleasure. Thanks, Jasmine.
Well, before we end, though, Monica, could you please tell our listeners how they can get involved and support your efforts and follow you online?
Yes, our website is ffacoalition.org. We are on a lot of different social media channels, and our handle is @FFA Coalition.
Wonderful. Well, I'm sure that our listeners and our flock members, if they're not already aware of your work, this has just been such an extraordinary interview. I'm like kind of blown away, to be honest. And I hope that you'll come back often, because there's so many, like we covered so much ground here. And I feel like we could take like any one of these subjects and do an entire interview about it. So thank you for all that you do. Thank you for being so generous with your time today and for inspiring us so much.
Thanks, Jasmine. I mean, our hen house has been an inspiration to me for over a decade now. So I definitely credit our hen house with having an impact on how I think about my activism as well. And yes, join the flock, and I'd love to have more conversations with people. And we do something similar at FFAC. We have culture shift conversations, plenty of community events. So again, I think that we're stronger and more effective together. So please do join the flock.
Wonderful. Thank you. If you like what you're listening to, and I hope you do, then please consider taking a minute out of your day today to leave us a friendly review. You can do it on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify or Stitcher or on Facebook or wherever you listen to podcasts or wherever you're listening to this. The more we get out there, the more our hen house will be in front of people's eyeballs when they're putting in search terms in their podcasts, and the more we could join forces together to elevate the voices of the animals and change the world for them. So thank you so much in advance for leaving us a friendly review.
Anxiety's rising. All right, this is kind of a special edition of Rising Anxieties because I just want to talk a little bit and give some attention to the recent trial and conviction of Wayne Hsiung of Direct Action Everywhere, because I think that the work that's being done by DXE is causing more anxiety in the industry than we can even imagine. And I think that's going to continue. And I certainly hope that's the case. They must hate these people. All right. Wayne was, as you've probably heard, convicted of breaking and entering and larceny, both felonies, for his rescue of a goat from a goat farm in North Carolina. The goat's name was Rain. The goat's name is Rain. Rain is still alive and well in an undisclosed location. And the defense that this sounds like it could be a theft. It sounds like it could be breaking and entering. But they put forward a defense. And of course, if you have a defense, then even though what your actions look like the crime that is against the law, you're not guilty of it because you have a defense. Like if it's you might kill somebody, which might look like murder, but if it's self-defense, if you kill them to defend yourself, then it's not a crime. The defense that they put forward, they call the right to rescue. And the law is all over the place in exactly how this defense works out. And it's a general defense in criminal law. It's not specific to animal cruelty. And it basically says, and like I said, this is not the same in every state. And it doesn't even really exist on paper in every state. It's kind of a lesser of two evils thing that you commit a crime in order to forestall another crime, the other crime being animal cruelty to this goat who it is alleged, and there was a good deal of evidence to show it was very sick and had to be taken to a veterinarian. And if you want more on the defense and a more detailed explanation, you can listen to Wayne's interview on episode 58 of the Animal Law podcast. But let's just talk about this case. Then I want to talk about some of the other pending cases, because you've probably all heard about the fact that these cases exist. But the fact is that they all got kind of put on hold for a long time because of COVID. And so they're now starting to really bubble to the surface. And this was the first one. And so among some of the issues, some of them are legal issues. Some of them may be troubling, but don't exactly present legal issues. And of course, I wasn't there, so I'm getting this secondhand. But for one thing, the judge granted a motion by the prosecution to exclude expert testimony from a vet who would have talked about Rain's condition after he was rescued. They took him to a vet, and he would, that seems pretty relevant to me. If your argument is that I rescued him because he was dying, then the doctor's opinion on that seems valid as relevant evidence. Also, they mentioned that the prosecution excluded all jurors who had ever volunteered at an animal shelter. Now, that may have been legally legitimate. I don't know. So usually in a criminal trial, each side is allowed to exclude jurors for pretty much any reason whatsoever. It might not have been against the law, but it's pretty sleazy, Oh, let's get rid of everybody who likes animals. Wayne, who is a lawyer, and he wanted to represent himself, but he wanted another lawyer as co-counsel. I mean, he's not a criminal lawyer in North Carolina. And believe me, all of this is very specific. Just because you're a lawyer doesn't mean you know all the laws everywhere. And they wouldn't allow him to do that, so he just represented himself. There were limitations on what he was allowed to say in his opening statement. So, and this is going to be appealed because he was convicted. And we'll see whether any of these were considered errors. I was very, very concerned because I think he was facing up to a 7-year sentence. And as it turned out, the judge suspended his sentence, which doesn't mean that he'll never end up in prison, but unless he gets in trouble, he will not have to serve time in prison for this. And I think there was a $250, I'm not sure whether it was a fine or compensation to the quote unquote farmer. So for a lot of people, including me, that was a relief, though I think Wayne, who's an interesting person, I think he was totally prepared to go to jail. And I would suspect, since we are talking about this as a rising anxiety situation, that one of the reasons he didn't get any time is because they do not want him to look like a martyr. They do not want more attention brought onto this. They don't want people getting upset about it. They don't want people feeling bad for him. So even, this kind of worked out well in that sense that they didn't send him to prison. All right, there's a bunch of other cases. I'd just like to go through them because I think anxieties are going to be at a fever pitch over this because all of these cases bring to bear the fundamental problem with the fact that we have anti-cruelty laws and we are horrifically cruel to animals. And the fact that this can exist in a world that is supposed to be ruled by the law is pretty weird. It's pretty weird. And all of these cases kind of expose the fact that cruelty to animals is not enforced against almost all of the people who are cruel to animals, and that there should be a defense. There should be a defense to it that if you're trying to save an animal from this crime of cruelty to animals, you can do things like take an animal out of a place where that animal is being mistreated. So let's see. I'm looking on the website. This is a case of either Jilly or Gilly against Iowa Select Farms. And this incident recurred in May 2020. It had to do with the situation of ventilation shutdown. Remember, in the very beginnings of COVID, they couldn't keep the slaughterhouses going, so they turned off all the ventilation in the factory farms, and these pigs were just allowed to die in utter agony. According to this, there were hidden cameras that captured pigs shrieking in agony. The temperatures were over 140 degrees Fahrenheit. And then after about 2 or 3 hours, workers with bolt guns went through and shot any pigs that still appeared to be alive. DXC activists Matt Johnson and Linda Cridge somehow got in, rescued one piglet, named her Jilly or Gilly, and brought her to sanctuary. And they are now facing felony burglary charges. That will go to trial fairly soon. We're hoping to get Matt Johnson on the podcast, but don't hold me to that. It looks good, but I can't be sure at this point. All right, another case: Sunrise Farms, Petaluma Poultry, Reichart Duck Farm. In this, there were a lot of activists involved in this. 100 activists were arrested. Apparently, 13 are facing criminal charges. There are 47 felonies amongst them. That should be going to trial soon as well. And this had to do with carrying out sick chickens during this mass open rescue at an egg facility. There's a case involving Smithfield. This one also involves Wayne Shung, along with Paul Darwin Picklesheimer. And they rescued 2 piglets, Lily and Lizzie, from a factory farm owned by Smithfield. This was in Utah. This got really a lot of attention because the FBI started to hunt down the piglets, and they raided sanctuaries. They cut off part of a pig's ear to do DNA testing. I mean, really? This is what the FBI is doing in this day and age? They're facing enormous prison time in this case. I think it says 60 years here between them. Ridgeland Farms in Dane County, Wisconsin. This was beagles, and this is a place that breeds beagles for experiments. And this was a while back, and investigators entered and documented it and found, dogs spinning endlessly inside small cages and rescued 3 beagles. The charges were only filed very recently, even though this happened a long time ago. And so no dates have really been set going forward in this case. And that involves Eva Hamer, again, Paul Darwin Picklesheimer, and again, Wayne Shung. Let's see what's next. Farmer John. You've probably heard of Farmer John. It's in Los Angeles. It's right in the city of Los Angeles. And 7 activists were arrested here, and they were attempting to rescue a pig whom they named Greta. And it's a slaughterhouse that kills about 7,000 pigs every day. Also happens to be the site of a massive COVID outbreak. There had been a huge protest after this attempted, though not successful, rescue. And some people were arrested. The 7 people who tried to save Greta are waiting to receive charges. So we're not sure exactly who's going to be charged in that case and what charges are going to be filed. All right. Pleasant Valley Farms. This is in California, San Joaquin Valley. According to the investigators from DXC, they saw cannibalism, infections, and death. This is a cage-free egg farm, so it's supposed to be a nice place. 2 of the investigators are being charged for over $330,000 in restitution. Costco actually claims, which is so ridiculous, to give animals the 5 freedoms, which include freedom from pain and suffering. And, they say they only sell cage-free eggs. And, as we all know, cage-free doesn't mean much. This is a court case that is currently on appeal. It's a civil case. It's not another criminal case. And then there's the Norbest turkey case. Whistleblowers expose the disturbing reality behind the humane marketing, quote unquote, humane marketing at Norbest Turkey Farm in Utah. The company's own CEO called their findings disturbing. This is the one that the charges just got dismissed. Paul Darwin Picklesheimer and Wayne Shung were both facing charges in this. And in November, the charges were officially dismissed by compromise. Interesting, right? Let's hope that this happens to all of the other ones as well, though I kind of doubt it. As I said, if this isn't raising the anxieties of the industry, then the industry doesn't know what's going on. And the thing I love about these cases is that they go right to the heart. They go right to the heart of the cruelty, the viciousness, the absolute disregard for what's happening to these animals. And people are putting their lives on the line in order to bring this to the world. So my anxieties are kind of rising about it too, because I don't want to see these people going to prison. So that's why I thought that instead of doing a regular Rising Anxieties, I'd cover this story for this month. And let's hope we have some good outcomes in these cases. We'll certainly be keeping an eye on them.
Well, that's it for this week's show. If you like the podcast and would like to show your support, join us for our end-of-year fundraising. We've had an amazing 2021, and we could not have done it without you. So we're hoping you'll join us once again to ensure another productive year for our hen house. The best part is that if you contribute between now and December 31st, your donation will be tripled dollar for dollar if we reach our goal of $20,000. That means that with your donation, plus our amazing Barnyard benefactors and an added boost from an anonymous donor, we're hoping to raise $60,000 total for year end. This is our main fundraiser of the year. We bring in the vast majority of our annual budget in November and December, so it's kind of a big deal for us. And we can't do it without you. The only way we'll receive the matching fund is if we successfully reach our goal of raising $20,000 from our loyal supporters by the end of the year. Huge or modest, every donation counts and will help us to reach that goal. If you're not already part of the flock, we invite you to join for $10 a month or $100 a year. You'll get some really cool perks, including weekly bonus content, access to our private Flock Facebook group, and an invitation to our monthly Flock First Friday Zoom meetings. Oh, and plus an opportunity to have a one-on-one Zoom meeting with me to talk about anything activism related. Plus, if you donate $100 or more, I'm going to send you a personalized video message to show you my undying love and gratitude. It's true. I love you. So, If you appreciate our hen house, if you believe in our mission to effectively mainstream the movement to end the exploitation of animals, if you find community and solace in our shows and our resources, and if you believe in the change-making power of indie media, please make a donation before December 31st, and your donation will be tripled. Contributions of any amount are greatly appreciated. To support us today, visit ourhenhouse.org/donate. That is ourhenhouse.org/donate. Another great way to support us is to leave us a fabulous review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts, or like us on Facebook. You could also leave us a review on Facebook, or follow us on Twitter or Instagram at Our Hen House. If you shop on Amazon, you can use Amazon Smile using Our Hen House as your favorite charity. And of course, tell your friends about us. If you're one of our listeners who already supports us, please know we appreciate you so very much. And thank you also to my co-host, Marianne Sullivan, and to Jen Riley for her work in producing this podcast. To composer Michael Herron for the music, thanks to Eric Montgomery of Podcast David for his work editing this podcast, to our production assistant, Jocelyn Martinez, and to Vicky Beechler for her membership and administrative help. We'd also like to give a shout out to the amazing Veronica Kalinska, who designed our brand new logos and other graphics. We'll be back next week with a brand new show, so don't forget to subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Jasmine Singer, and I'll talk to you next week.